So what I always advise people is someone will come and they'll say, "Oh, Richard, that thing you did, the thing with the booklets and the seats, that was unbelievable. I'd like a little bit of that action on my team." And you go, "Okay, but you got to do it my way." So what you do when you have a small win in a big corporate environment is, if people step up and say, "Oh, I'd like a bit of that. Oh, the way you've got those people communicating brilliantly now and not boring people with bullet points, I'd like a bit of that on my team." And you go, "Okay, um, but you have to do it my way." And you get to call the shots. And then by doing that next project, what you're doing is you're increasing your scope of influence. You're building your tribe of people who are into what you're doing. And slowly but surely, you're getting your way around the board, and you're beginning to change your culture. One project at a time, not by getting overwhelmed because you've got so many things to do.
Welcome to the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. I'm Richard Metcalf, founder of X Quadrant, and my mission is to help the world's top CEOs and entrepreneurs shift from incremental to exponential progress and create a huge positive impact on our world. Now, that requires you to reinvent yourself and transform your business. So, if you're ready to play a bigger game than ever before, I invite you to join us and become an Impact Multiplier CEO. How can you land your mission and your message with real logical and emotional impact? That's the question that I explore today with Jack Murray. Jack is an entrepreneur. He's the CEO of MediaHQ. It's a leading Irish software as a service company that's revolutionized the PR and communications industry with a comprehensive media contacts database and press release distribution tools. He's also an author. He's written a book called The Magic Slice. And today we look at really interesting concepts, really practical tools that you can use as you engage your stakeholders to land those most important vision that you have with real impact. We look at actually how corporate culture can get in the way of engagement and landing your message. Jack offers some really specific tools that help you clarify your mission, sharpen it up, get you really clear on what you want to say. And then he explains the Magic Slice tool, which will help you land that message with impact. We also get into neuroscience and look at actually how the way that most people build presentations actually works against the brain's chemical system, and what to do instead to release those feel-good feelings that are going to win hearts and minds and get people engaged with what you're saying. So enjoy this fascinating conversation with Jack Murray. Hi, Jack, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Richard. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. And I'm looking forward to jumping in today. We've entitled this episode, at least provisionally, we might change it in the final mix, but our working title is How to Land Your Mission and Message with Impact. So obviously, I know that you are somebody who focuses a lot on this. You've written a book on storytelling. You've built up MediaHQ over the last 18 years to be one of the most dynamic media contact platforms in the world. So what I want to know is, why is landing on your mission and message with impact important to you? Why is that a subject which is close to your heart?
Yeah, well, the reason it's very close to my heart is, I suppose, my life's work has been in the realm of storytelling and helping people communicate their message with their audience. And one of the kind of profound and fundamental things about all of us is that our operating systems are all driven by stories. So from long before we wake up in the morning, actually, we're telling ourselves a story as we sleep at night. The things that help us achieve great things every day are driven by the stories that we tell ourselves. We communicate to people in stories. And in the world of work and the world of business, there's a really weird dichotomy where people tend to be really good at communicating in personal family settings with people they trust. And then when they get into work settings, they get a lot more stiff, a lot more wooden.
Boring. Let's just say it's boring.
Yeah.
So
well, boring, safe, dry, lacking kind of the natural flair and creativity and cadence that they would have in dealing with people that they know. And it's funny, I for a number of years, I used to run a storyteller course. And one of the things we would do on the storyteller course is that we would say to people, can you give us a photograph of something personal that means something to you that you're willing to talk about. And at a random point in the day, your name would pop up on the screen and you would go to the top of the room and you would tell this story. And it became a series of very powerful moments where one that really kind of stays in my mind was it was a large multinational organization. And the woman on the team who was the junior admin person on the team, her name came up and she came to the top of the room. And it was a black and white photograph of a woman and a man in their early 20s, taken in about 1950. And the woman stood up and she was a Dutch lady. And she said, this is my grandpapa and my grandmama. And he's the reason that our family succeeded. And she kind of welled up and got emotional and talked about how he went down into working in a mine to earn enough money that her father could go to college. And her emotion connected with everybody in the room. And what you'd find in in those moments were that people kind of went back to their instincts, and everybody began to see them in a different light. And what they were actually doing was tuning into that innate power that we all have to communicate clearly with stories in a way that is emotionally resonant with people. But that when we go into business or corporate environments, it's almost programmed out of us. It happens even in formal education. It starts in formal education where, a lot of formal education was designed for the industrial age. It was designed to put people into a factory environment where creative thinking or a lot of education is designed so that it's easy to correct if you're and that doesn't necessarily encourage flair and like bringing that natural edge to outward communication about your brand and your mission and all of that is crucial, but also in how you communicate with your colleagues. And we spend thousands and thousands of hours at meetings communicating about things that we're passionate about. A lot of it is awful. It is just terrible. And like the best communication is when you go for a coffee or you go for lunch and you kind of think, well, why couldn't the communication and the culture within organizations be more like this than the wooden staid stuff that goes on? And I suppose, yeah, like my dedication of impact is to that, and all aspects of storytelling in how they could improve to help people get their message across, be understood, and I suppose feel better on a daily basis as a result of it.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? You're right. Things can be so, well, I said boring, and then you actually said safe, which I think is interesting. So is this draining of color, of this way that we communicate sometimes in corporate so dry? Is it just what people think is expected? That I have to have my PowerPoint slide with my bullet points, and that's just the way it's done around here? Or is it that people feel that they don't want to share on an emotional level? Or yeah, so is it, are people deliberately playing safe, or do they just think that's kind of what is expected, that's what's wanted, that's what's necessary?
Yeah, well, we create these environments where they are not emotionally safe spaces, and people, they're not places that encourage people to be vulnerable in. And if anything, they're the work environment. A lot of work environments tend to be the exact opposite. And John Hegarty wrote two seminal books. One of them was called, which everyone will remember, is called Hegarty on Advertising. But the other one, which is less heralded, but is a brilliant book, is Hegarty on Creativity. And there's a bit in the book where he said, and like the simplest questions, Richard, stump people. And we'll get on to that famous question of what is your mission that completely stumps people. But the question that really stumped him was, someone said, what makes creative people different to other people? And he said he really had to think about it. And he said the answer was that creative people take risks. So, really creative people, and I have friends who are writers, who are musicians, who are artists, and they create stuff without fear or favor. So they create stuff because they want to create stuff, and they don't really care if anybody likes it. And that's a kind of an anathema to a corporate environment where like generating creative stuff can cause a problem, because it leaves you vulnerable and weak. Because if you go to a meeting and say, look, I've got this great creative idea, and people will say, oh, well, that's terrible, then that's pinned to your lapel. And it's the reason that creative agencies and consultants get picked up from organizations, because they need They need the fresh eye from outside to come in, because the culture inside is not a place that can encourage them to do the things that they need to. And it is interesting in that's a functional dysfunction that happens in the world of work where, and like, look, I've worked as a consultant similar to you. The fresh eye from outside it's a great perspective, but I think healing from within and helping people to communicate more freely. And I wrote about this in my book, but the Amazon innovation of the 6-page narrative memo, that after they had done it for a couple of years, they brought it down to a 4-page narrative memo. And we use that. I use that with my management team to run MediaHQ. And we have a management meeting once a month where people have to write a 4-page narrative memo. And I have to, I do still have to remind people where I say, look, okay, we're all adults now. We circulate the memo 2 days before the meeting. And I say, look, we've all read the memo. So you don't need to, you don't need to read it again. Is there any particular point or comment that someone raised on your memo that you'd like to have a discussion about now? Or is there any point you'd like to talk about that you feel really strongly about? And it's a much better way of interacting with people than standing in front of a room, reading bullet points that they can read themselves, and having a meaningful discussion, as opposed to just this kind of wooden performance in front of a PowerPoint.
Well, I must admit, one of the things looking back at corporate, is how much energy and effort goes into all these huge decks. People spend days and days, just communicating to each other, right? It's not actually creating value in the business. It's just the communication component. Obviously, you've got to get everybody aligned, but it's amazing how much time is spent on decks that frankly nobody's going to read. All right.
Yeah, and it's funny, when I do the storyteller course, you get this moment where, and you'll see this kind of fear flash across people's faces when you go through this new method of communicating with stories and not reading bullet points. And someone will say to you, but if people ask for my deck afterwards, it'll just be a series of words and pictures. And I say, yeah, because it's a slide deck, not a Word document. And if you're producing a paper that you want someone to read, produce a paper that you want someone to read, and actually write it as a paper. Or if you're producing a slide deck, it's a performance piece. But the two things are not the same. And if you want people to have a proper discussion, get them a document 2 days in advance, and then have a debate with them about it, and argue through the meaty points that you put in your thing. But it is not a story. And what happens in lots of corporate environments is that the damage gets passed on. So you treat others the way you perform the way other people perform, and it just becomes this self-defeating cycle then.
Yeah. Well, so tell me, so if somebody wants to up their ability to land their mission and their message with impact, what would be the tools that you'd recommend they start to work with?
Yeah, and I think look, to land your mission and your message with impact starts at the start point of the mission. And one of the most powerful and forceful questions that you can ask in any situation is, what does success look like here? In any project that I'm involved in, I had a potential client on the storytelling side of my business contact me last week, and they said, "Oh, we want you to be involved. We want you." And I said to them, "Imagine it's all over, and you're saying, 'Oh, that's brilliant. What does that look like?'" And people are terrible when you ask them, what does success look like, or what do we want to achieve? And I'm a huge fan of sports, because I think there's so many great analogies in sport for how business could run better. And it doesn't matter if it's like the European Cup or the World Cup. The trophies, we all know what success looks like in sport. We know what the cup looks like that we've to lift over our heads. And my late dad used to joke, he was a very hardworking man. He used to get dirt under his fingers. And when he'd hear I was going on holidays to an exotic location, he'd say, "You're going on holidays again?" And I used to say to him, "Dad, they don't make cups or medals for what I do. I make them myself." And so I think the first part of connecting your message with impact is you have to know what your mission is, and know what you're trying to achieve. I do lots of talks in universities, and I say, look, if you're brought in on a storytelling project or a public relations project, always ask at the start, what are we trying to do here? And really good communicators, they know what the dial looks like, and they know where they need to move the needle on it. And one of the hardest questions is, why are we all here, and what does success look like? And in my company, in MediaHQ, if somebody wants to start something new, Step number one in that process is what we call, you have to write an objectives document. So you have to write a one-page objective document spelling out why it needs to happen and what does the main objective of the project is, what success would look like. And I think people really kind of suffer with that. So lots of people communicate, they communicate a lot of things, but it's not driven or guided by any kind of overall direction or meaningful sense of what's possible. And I think that's where a lot of it falls down.
Yeah. And so where I'm thinking here is, how emotionally invested in a corporate environment do people need to be, or should they be, in whatever they're trying to communicate? Because ideally for me, like get me talking about my mission, I'm all in, right? I've crafted, this is my mission. This is what I want to be up to in the world, hoping the top leaders in the planet be forces for good at scale. So I know what I'm about. But in a corporate environment where you're like, okay, like, is it my mission? Is it the personal? Is it the company mission? And what is the company mission anyway? Can we find it anywhere? And is it just, or is it like, we've got to hit these numbers for the end of the quarter? So when you think about mission, like, how do you define that, I suppose? The mission to like, the shareholder value.
Yeah. I'm lucky enough that, like, my career path has been on a series of projects or initiatives that I'm like you, that I've always been kind of wholly invested in. And if I'm not wholly invested in something, I don't really want to do it, if I'm being honest. Now, I know not everybody is like that. And look, part of my personal ethos is that, work doesn't seem like work when you're completely aligned with it and you're motivated by it. It begins to really feel like work. Like, people often say to me, "What do you do?" And my opening line is always, "Well, it beats working for a living." And so, like, look, the first big job I had when I left university was as a spokesperson for a political party, and that was an interesting kind of contact sport because, if you didn't believe in if you didn't, and in public relations and communications, if you don't really believe what you're talking about, you're in real trouble, because um, there's a kind of, you'll get found out pretty quickly. It's a bit like being in a boxing match and waving your chin in front of the other person. You will get hit. Whereas the best way to communicate is to be, for me, it's simple. It's to be all in. And why would you be doing it when you're not all in? And, like, look, you can have, in a corporate environment, you can have a myriad of missions. You can have ones that you're fully aligned with, or ones that you're not aligned with at all. Lots of times people will come to me and say, "Look, I want to enact real change on how to communicate my mission and impact, but I have so many things to do. I have so many expectations. I work in a large corporate environment. What do I do?" And I said to them, "Well, that's really easy." And they said, "What?" I said, "Well, look, just have really good success on one project." Um, and I said, "Write the rules." And there's a fantastic story project that just always excites me, from a couple of years ago. And it was a small regional airline in Iceland called Air Iceland Connects. And they run kind of regional flights around Scandinavia. And somebody had this really great idea that they needed in-flight entertainment. And they had no money. So they had, I think, €2,000 to spend on in-flight entertainment. And, like, bar renting a brass band for half an hour to go up and down a plane, I've, like, what were they going to do? So sometimes with creativity and with storytelling, with messaging, you embrace your constraints, and having a constraint like €2,000 is a brilliant thing to have. And they created this journal notebook called My Stories, beautifully produced, and they got a handful of them, a couple of hundred of them, and they put them in the back of the seats on the planes. So people were coming from amazing holidays in Iceland, and they were taking the books out from the backs of the seats, and in a digital world, they were writing analog stories on the back pages of, stories about people falling in love, people, seeing the sunset, people seeing the northern lights, people making friends. And then other people were coming and digitizing that by taking pictures of it, uploading it to Instagram. And it was a massive success. A journalist from the Financial Times came and wrote about it, and it kind of went around the world after he did that. And when you enact change on a mission, on a small project, for your impact, what you're doing is you're actually saying, you know what, I understand how this works. And if you want me to help you, you have to do it on my terms. So what I always advise people is someone will come and then say, oh, Richard, that thing you did, the thing with the booklets and the seats, that was unbelievable. I'd like a little bit of that action on my team. And you go, okay, but you got to do it my way. So what you do when you have a small win in a big corporate environment is, if people step up and say, "Oh, I'd like a bit of that," "Oh, the way you've got those people communicating brilliantly now and not boring people with bullet points, I'd like a bit of that on my team." And you go, "Okay, um, but you have to do it. But you have to do it my way, and you get to call the shots." And then by doing that next project, what you're doing is you're increasing your scope of influence. You're building your tribe of people who are into what you're doing. And slowly but surely, you're getting your way around the board, and you're beginning to change your culture, one project at a time, not by getting overwhelmed because you've got so many things to do.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a beautiful lesson, and it comes across in every area, right? Fewer but better is almost always the way for success. I remember when I was early days of my career in consulting, I actually missed the promotion by 6 months. Like, they pushed it back 6 months because to get my promotion, I had to show that I was a great project manager. And so these 3 great projects came along, and normally only one was going to happen, and they were meant to be staggered, and literally all got signed on the same day, and I was in all the proposals. And then I could have just chosen one and let the other 2 go, but they all seemed so exciting. I kind of figured out that if I worked all hours, I could kind of do it. And of course, what happened? I delivered all 3 mediocre. It was fine. I mean, fine, but I didn't nail any of them. They were all fine. But if I'd just done one, nobody would have gone, Richard, you only done one project, right? They'd have said, you absolutely nailed that project. Great job. Here's your promotion. And that was the fundamental lesson for me. It's I'm not doing that again. Because
No, actually,
I worked all hours, and B, I didn't get the result. And I realized that with my clients as well, you focus in, you do one thing that really gets an outsized results, and that's worth far better.
Oh no, exactly. And like 2 short stories, kind of that arise out of that. Like I had a group of communications managers on a communication strategy course a number of years ago, and we were talking exactly about this, and that was a fascinating course because I would get people maybe 10, 12 years into their career who were utterly broken, smashed by the corporate world. Literally, we're managing 2 or 3 creative agencies, and we're literally not doing any of the work themselves. We're just sitting there managing budget lines, and we've all seen it. But there was one woman in the audience, and she was a head of communications director for an organization that dealt with tax and taxation. And I asked people, what was the biggest problem that they had? So it came to her, and she said, I'll tell you what my biggest problem is. And I said, what? And she said, it's tax. And I said, well, what about tax? It's boring. I said, yeah, it's very hard to get people interested in it. And the same week, I had this very precocious 16-year-old who was with a year in Ireland called transition year. It's that kind of development year. And he was in the room. And when she said this, I could see his hand go up down the back. And I was going, what's this about? Kind of said, "Oh yeah, do you have something you want to add?" He said, Can I talk to the woman about who's dealing with the tax?" And I said, "Yeah." And the 16-year-old directly addressed the communications director, and he said to her, "Have you ever heard of a podcast called Planet Money? It's really fascinating, and they deal with the economy in a way that's really story driven, and they've brilliant stories every week about taxation. You should listen to it sometime." And there was the 16-year-old teaching the comms director how to suck eggs on the basis of passion about the thing that you're doing every day. And this notion of he could see the angles. Now she was taking on serious water because probably didn't understand the mission. And if she did understand it, she just wasn't into it. And she was completely misaligned. So she wasn't having an impact with telling her story because one, she didn't really get it, and she wasn't going to get excited by it because she was absolutely misaligned. So you do it, I find anyway, in communicating and getting stuff out there, the more aligned you are, and the more passionate you are, you become a sponge for all sorts of angles and nuances, and you just pick stuff up in the easiest possible way because you're aligned with what you're doing.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation. This is just a quick interlude to introduce you to two transformative programs that we run. The first is Rivendell, my exclusive group of top CEOs who are committed to transforming themselves, their businesses, and the world. It's an incredible peer group and a deep coaching experience that will push you to new heights, no matter how successful you've already been. The second is Impact Accelerator, a coaching program for executives who are ready to make a big leap forward in their own leadership. It's regularly described as life-changing, and no other program provides such personal, strategic clarity, a measurable shift in stakeholder perceptions, and a world-class leadership development environment. Find out about both of these programs at xquadrant.com/services. Now, back to the conversation. Absolutely. Well, I'm thinking of CEO clients that I've worked with who actually I had to kind of scratch because like that, you're interested in what you're doing. It's intellectually interesting, but I'm not really sensing the passion or the real excitement or like you're really loving this. Perhaps the joy is faded over time. Perhaps you just got your projects and you're within the zone of like just executing and just doing this thing and keeping the board happy and everything. But I think when people lose that spark, it comes through in all sorts of ways. You can't hide it. You can pretend, you can turn up the charisma, perhaps, with your team and everything else. But there is something that goes at that time when you're not fully committed. So you have to get back to that. But let's assume at this point that you are connected to that mission. And so you do know what that is. Then what would you say in terms of a tool set for helping land those messages with impact? Where would you go next?
Yeah. And I think look, as you said at the start, I've written a book about this, and the book is called The Magic Slice. And it's about how to master the art of storytelling for business. And the magic slice is two circles. So one is what you want to talk about, and the other is what people are interested in. And the magic slice is where the two circles touch. And sometimes they don't touch at all. And sometimes they touch very gently, and other times they completely overlap. So, we've all seen kind of huge stories. So if you're in the Port Authority in Baltimore today, I'm assuming the whole world is ringing their head of communications about that terrible tragedy that's after happening. And so the first step is being aligned with your mission. The second step then, which is a really fundamental step to finding your magic slice of attention or of story, is to understand your audiences, and to know exactly who the target customer is, who the target audience is. In one of my first jobs, Richard, I worked in a shoe company, and my boss, who was the marketing director, had a stack of women's magazines on his desk. And remember, the first couple of days, kind of poking fun at him, saying, "Oh, you read women's magazines?" And he kind of just looked me dead in the eye and he said, "You'll be reading them soon. All of our customers read these magazines." And I was sent out back to school. Fashion was really big, and I was sent out to do focus group research with 16-year-old girls to figure out what shoe styles that were really good. And in the middle of, just before the really busy season, one of the designers came back from Milan Fashion Week with a really interesting sole, but all the schools were on holiday. And I was dispatched. There's a thing in Ireland where children learn the Irish language during the summer. So I was dispatched with my pidgin Irish to an Irish language school and a tape recorder. And I came back, and it was a real lesson to me in understanding your audience for impact. In the lobby of the building, I was met by the CEO, the financial director, the head of materials, and the chief designer. All wanted to know what the girls thought of the new sole, and did they think it'd be a winner, and I was 24 years of age. And that was a real lesson to me in, okay, if you have deep insights on the audience, you're going to make a huge impact, because the more you know, and when I talk to college students who are going to work in the world of communications, I said, the more you will become more useful and more powerful and more impactful the more you understand the people you're talking to, their needs, their wants, their desires, their expectations. Um, and th- th- if you're a detective on the case trying to figure out what that frequency is, you will be always useful to the end market. Um, I got a call this morning. We're changing our prime minister here in Ireland, and our new prime minister is all over TikTok. And there's a phenomenon that they're calling him so our prime minister is called the Taoiseach. So they're calling him the TikTok Taoiseach. And I'm doing an interview with the Irish Times just about like what does that look like from an audience point of view. But I went down the stairs about 2 hours ago, and I said to my daughter, "Can you do me a favor?" Yeah, I said, "I need your insight." Yeah, I said, "I'm doing an interview about the prime minister and TikTok. Can you spin up an email? Can you go on his TikTok and tell me what you think about it?" And why are you asking me that? I said, "Because it's you he's trying to influence on TikTok." I said, "It's not me." And she came back and she gave me a brilliant insight. She said he was really early to it in the middle of the pandemic. People followed him at the start because they were taking the mickey out of him. He is getting his message across, but I'm not quite sure, is it always kind of received the way he thinks he's going to receive it, or it's expected the way it's going to be. So I suppose the next thing then is understanding your audience, um, and the point after that then is you begin to tune into wider frequencies in so you know your mission, you understand your audiences. Um, then you start looking at kind of, well, what are the key trends? What's my scope of work? So what am I trying to achieve? And then what else is kind of happening in the environment? So like so right now it would be maybe tech contraction, AI, global recession, high interest rates. They're just kind of broad themes that are happening in the world right now. Um, but and then I suppose every organization itself will point out, well, here's what we want to achieve this year. So we need to sell X amount of product, or we need to communicate this, or we need to grow by 15%. And when you understand all of that, then you're in a position to start crafting stories. Um, what I do then, like in the magic slice method, is you begin to look at topics that the brand can credibly talk about, and you write a magic slice statement. And the magic slice statement is a little bit like the mission statement, but it's plugged into topics um, and realities for the business and that are happening in the world right now. And there's a list of topics that you would be really good to talk about. And it's only at that point that you start crafting and creating stories that will be relevant to the audience. And normally what people do is they rock in and they start telling stories, but they don't plug it into any of that stuff.
Right. So what I'm hearing is that actually plugging into the broader trends that are going on in the world is important to ground it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. And I think, well, like, I suppose there's three guiding factors. This is my overall mission. Like, this is what the top of the mountain looks like. These are the people that, need to hear what I'm saying. And then the third part of it are, well, this is what I need to achieve in the next 12 months. And this is what's going on in the world right now. And when you get a handle on those three things, it's only then that you can begin to craft stories based on specific topics that are relevant that you can talk with credibility on. And it's only at that point that you can actually get to the point of communicating stories. And that's like when you get to the opening, like I suppose when you get to the opening door then of how to craft stories, that's a whole other skill set and a whole other to do.
So it sounds like it's quite a lot of work. I can understand you do this when you're talking with a brand about their next marketing campaign and so forth. Do you see this as something that people can do, when they've got a new project kicking off or a deck they're trying to create or whatever? Like, do you still go through that same process?
Yeah, and like it's one of those things where, like, if you think about it, like a story can be everything from a 30-second YouTube ad to a 3 hour long movie, and everything else kind of in between. And the fundamentals are, what do you want to do? Who are you talking to? And what does a short term win look like? So what do you want to do is like we want to land, we want to land a man on the moon or a person on the moon. You know, your audience is your audience, and then the kind of what's happening in the here and now and your 12-month objective, they're kind of check-in points along the journey, because if we take too much stuff on, we kind of get overwhelmed. But when you get to the really interesting part then, and the really interesting part, I suppose, is you've got through all of that. Well, tell me a little bit then about what does it take to create an actual story. And the fascinating thing about storytelling is that the transaction of storytelling and why it works so well is very scientific. And when we meet a long lost friend, or we go to the pub on a Friday night, or we go to a wedding, or we go to a funeral and somebody reads an amazing eulogy, what happens is stories trigger hormones, and hormones make us feel in a certain way. So really expert communicators know the stories that they're going to tell, and they do it for desired outcome. And the three positive hormones are dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins. And the two to avoid are cortisol and adrenaline. And the dopamine is the whodunit. It's the murder mystery. It's the reason that crime and all of those sort of things, court cases, is the reason those stories are really powerful. Oxytocin is the sharing hormone. So it's opening up, revealing something of yourself, building trust. Endorphins are triggered by humor. And then cortisol and adrenaline are triggered by reading out bullet points, anger, stress, tension, things to be avoided kind of at all costs. And I suppose they're the top line kind of driving hormones that would drive kind of how you would communicate. And if you want people to listen really clearly and to really take on detail, tell a story where you slowly reveal the punchline, and people will really listen. I was commissioned a number of years ago to do a series of stories for the Irish national radio station. And the theme of it was media moments that changed the world. So we looked at everything from that famous interview that Diana did, to the Challenger shuttle exploding, to Nixon's dog, and a whole load of other ones. But we told them in 10-minute stories, in a perfect story arc. And I was at a drinks reception one night, and I bumped into this woman, and she said to me, "Oh, you're the guy who does the stories on the radio." And I said, "Yeah." They were on Wednesdays at 1:00. And she said, "I love them, but I curse you every Wednesday." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "I'm always late to pick my son up from school because I always have to wait to hear what happens at the end." She said, "I can't get out of the car until I hear the final bit of the story." And I think that's a piece that people, they understand kind of intellectually why stories work, but they don't fully. That's the bit under the hood. That's once that kind of drops, you think, okay, this is the only show in town.
Yeah, it's a great reminder. It reminds me of my uncle, actually, who, whenever his wife, my aunt, is about to tell a story, he will close her down because she's going to do it in 30 seconds. And then he'll say, no, let's go back. And then he'll then take half an hour to tell the same story.
Yeah.
But there's normally a punchline.
Yeah, and look, the mad thing about this, Richard, is that we are all hardwired. Like, we're all hardwired from a very early age. We're all natural storytellers. Like, it's actually an innate talent that everybody has, and some people nurture it and kind of keep it up, and other people kind of, they lose it, or the environments in which they operate in. And when you get down into the kind of minutiae of it, then that there's if you look at the elements of an actual story, then, and every story has a hero. It's very obvious at the start of the story what the hero's want or need is. Very early into the story, something happens to the hero that sets them on a journey. There's an inciting incident at the start that sets them on a journey. About halfway through the story, there's a point of crisis. And generally, it's a crossroads where left is hell and damnation and right is salvation. And then near the end of the story, the forces of good face the forces of evil. There's a resolution and a moral. Now, everything you watch, everything you consume, everything that you engage with, if it's any good, it has all of those things in it. And if you say to people, well, who's the hero of the story and what's their desire? And if you're working on any project for impact, and you really want to get your message across, have a look at your story and say, look, is it clear to the audience who the protagonist is here? Are they likable? And like, it was funny, like, we live now in the era of the 100-hour story. And when The Sopranos came along, that amazing HBO drama series kind of introduced us to the 100-hour story arc. And like, Tony Soprano kind of was one of the first great anti-heroes. And in the corporate world, even you'd think of somebody like Michael O'Leary and Reiner. Like, you don't have to be likable. You just have to be compelling. You just have to be compelling. And even look, we now are in an era of, Trump et al. And like, we take that to a whole other level. So there's this notion of kind of compellability. And but if you have a corporate story that you want to tell, like, if you go through it and you think, okay, we know who the hero is, but we're not quite sure what they want, that's really not clear. The more you dial that up, the crisper it gets, the better it is. And I suppose the other thing, that doesn't happen in the business world is storytelling is all about process. And in the era of social media and all of that, the world loves process now. The corporate world, um, in lots of cases deals with the finished kind of shiny object at the end. A story is, as you were saying about your uncle, it can meander, it can go up and down, but it will get there. And if it's good, it'll bring everybody with them right to the finish. And that can be kind of disjointed when it comes to corporate audiences as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this, Jack. It's really helpful to remember. I mean, I've looked at this, I've studied this, and then not being professional in it, I find myself drifting away, right? I can do that and get conceptual, get in my head, talk about the things. And it's a fascinating reminder, right? That, yeah, these story arcs that we experience so often in all the time, all around us in creative works, they're also present in our own lives and stories and business, and we can tap into those. It just takes a bit of effort, right? Because sometimes we think, well, do we have all that? Do we really, do we really have the hero? Do we really have the big crisis point? Do we really have all that, that resolution? So I think it's just a bit of an art or a practice. That's those in the mundane as well.
It is, yeah. And I also think that, like, just for people on a personal level as well, that, like, and I'm thinking of, like, making career impacts and stuff. We are all guided and governed by the stories that we tell ourselves. And in our own operating systems as business leaders, as executives, as team members, we can achieve, if a team lead comes in and says, oh, we're going to create real good impact and we have the talent here, we're all going to do it. People go on that mission, but we can be limited to by negative stories as well. And like, I'm a huge believer in self, like in really examining your own narrative arc, your own operating system, like the stories that shaped and formed you. So when we, as adults, if we rock into something, all the good bits are the good bits we learned from small to big, and all the bad bits are the things we learned from when we were small as well. And it is really important because you will increase the impact that you make. And I would have done a lot of work like this on myself for the last 5 or 6 years, and my impact, in regards how I've grown the business, in regards my health, mental and physical health and well-being, and my productivity in writing a book, would all have come through really examining my own personal story and thinking, okay, what parts of this are really serving me, or what parts of it aren't, and what parts of it, am I able to change, and what parts of it are open to change. And a lot of that is driven by an internal story operating system. But it's only by pausing and investigating and putting that under the microscope to realize, oh, that's what I'm bringing to that, or that's why that really stresses me out, or this is the reason that I do that all the time. And the more you can blueprint that as part of your own story, I think the more powerful you can be as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's why I say to my clients that one of my roles is not to believe the stories they tell me,
Yeah.
because so often that's it.
Yeah, and it is that thing where you kind of scratch the surface a little bit. Someone will give you something as a de facto truth, and you'll go, What's that about?" Or what, where does that come from?" Or "Why do you think that?" Or and like sometimes, like when my kids were really small and they were on the why, like I used to always call the third why like the dawn of humanity. That, like you're only three whys from the dawn of humanity, and if you why something three times, like you're nearly back to the Big Bang, So it's a very powerful tool for investigation.
Yeah, thank you. So Jack, as we wrap up here, this has been a great conversation. I always like to ask people, what's it going to look like for you to multiply your impact in the coming years? You've built your business. Like, what's next, or what would be incredible for you?
Yeah, and it's like it is interesting, and my dad died 8 years ago, and I wrote the eulogy for him, and a friend of mine died um, very young before Christmas. He was a very successful entrepreneur, a man called Jerry McCaughey, 60 years of age, and would have had a massive impact in the global timber frame house manufacturer. And I delivered a eulogy for Jerry as well at his funeral. And I think in those moments when you stand up to assess somebody that you love and the impact that they have in the world, I think it really makes you kind of pause and investigate on a personal level. Like if somebody was to do it for you, what would that look like? And um, it isn't always what you think. It isn't more money. It isn't more material things. It isn't bigger is better. I think it's the personal impact that you have on those people around you, and um, how much love and respect that you were able to garner and grow with the people who were close to you, how meaningful the relationships you had, and how fulfilling every day of your life was. Um, my dad worked in a business that was started by my great grandfather, and he I realized when he passed on, like my dad was a socialist. Like he had no interest in money. He loved he loved work and he loved helping people. Um, and and I think for me, like it's to continue to get deep into my craft, um, build technology to help people find their audiences, and share stories in Media HQ. Um, and look at ways to embrace new technology like AI to continue that journey. We're very mission driven in Media HQ. So when you're mission driven, you'll always try and find the best way to do something. You never get hung up on methods. You're always trying to deliver the mission in the best way possible. And I think it's to have meaningful relationships, have a laugh and a smile every day, and try and impact people positively, and do a little bit of good along the way while feeling good about yourself. Um, and I think in the final analysis, like, you know, the love that people have for you in the final analysis is really what you'll be measured by in my book. And that's the lesson I've learned in the last few years.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. So Jack, thank you for this. How can people get in touch with you or find out what you're up to in the world and about your book?
Yeah, so Media HQ is just mediahq.com. I'm on Twitter, I'm Media Murray, and I love LinkedIn. And if you like this and you want to connect with me, I'm kind of all over LinkedIn. I find it a great social network for, I'm big into business networks and kind of connecting with people. So LinkedIn as well. And my email is just jack@mediahq.com.
Perfect. Thanks. Thanks again. And the book is called The Magic Slice.
The book is called The Magic Slice. There it is. How to Master the Art of Storytelling for Business.
Excellent stuff. Jack, thanks so much. I look forward to continuing the conversation over the months to come.
Thanks, Richard.
Well, that's a wrap. If you received value from this conversation, please do leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform. We'd deeply appreciate it. And if you'd like to check out the show notes from this episode, head to xquadrant.com/podcast, where you'll find all the details. Now, finally, when you're in top leadership, who supports and challenges you at a deep level to help you multiply your impact? Discover more about the different ways we can support you at xquadrant.com.